and Chengdao stands immovable against the swarming tide of monstrosities. Not a single trace of hesitation flickers in his eyes as the freaks close in. A raw, burning hatred pulses from the old butcher, so powerful it begins to seep into Lin Yi's own mind, anchoring them together in this shared nightmare. The line between observer and participant blurs. Lin Yi feels the weight of the steel in his hands, his own muscles tensing as he joins the gruesome dance of slaughter. He lunges forward, the bone-chopping knife leading the way. The target is a lunging freak, its grotesque form wide open for a strike. The strike is precise, aimed directly at the joints. The momentum of the heavy blade carries through, severing limbs with terrifying efficiency. But even as the monsters fall, a cold seed of doubt begins to take root in Lin Yi's mind. Something about this battle is fundamentally wrong. The horde is endless. For every creature cut down, two more seem to emerge from the encroaching shadows, an impossible tide that defies the logic of memory. If Chengdao had truly faced these numbers, he would have been torn apart in seconds. The historical survival of the man doesn't match the carnage currently unfolding. Another freak falls to the butcher's relentless assault, its body slumping into the growing pile of corpses. Lin Yi turns to face the next wave, but his eyes widen in disbelief. The corpse he just created is gone. The monster's remains vanish into thin air, evaporating like mist under a harsh sun. There is no blood, no smell, no trace of its existence left behind. The conclusion is inescapable. This isn't a simple memory. Someone else is here, actively distorting the past to suit their own ends. With that realization, the fog of borrowed rage begins to lift, and the connection to Chengdao's visceral hatred starts to unravel. The haze of shared hatred lifts as Lin Yi's perception abruptly shifts. He is no longer bound to the butcher's senses. He is seeing through his own eyes once more. He looks down at his own form, discovering a shimmering, translucent body that pulses like a ghost suspended in the void. The threads of fate emerge from his chest, glowing with a soft, spectral light as they stretch away and disappear through a window to his right. He looks up, and his breath hitches. Floating in the air outside the window is a figure, a man with a complex tattoo etched across his face. The stranger is a semi-transparent spirit, just like Lin Yi, his form shimmering with a cold, predatory energy.
It seems you finally noticed me.
A momentary flicker of surprise crosses the stranger's eyes as Lin Yi turns to face him, but it is gone in an instant. The man's expression hardens into a look of freezing disdain as he sneers at his uninvited guest. He spreads his arms wide in a grand, mocking gesture of welcome, as if he is the master of this crumbling world.
Welcome to this man's consciousness space. And now you're going to be trapped here with him. Forever.
Lin Yi lunges toward the window with desperate intensity. He has to reach that man, to tear his influence out of Chengdao's fractured mind. But his path is abruptly cut off. A freak surges from the gray mist, its distorted form blocking his way with predatory intent. The creature raises its serrated scythe-like forearm, the dark metal glinting with a lethal hunger as it prepares to strike. Lin Yi freezes, his instincts momentarily failing him. He assumes the monster is just another memory, a phantom aiming for the butcher. But a quick glance reveals the terrifying truth. Chengdao is several yards away, locked in a separate struggle with another beast. This attack is meant solely for him. His heart hammers against his ribs like a trapped bird. In a panic, Lin Yi scrambles backward, his spectral feet slipping on the fragmenting ground. He isn't fast enough. The jagged edge of the monster's limb slices through the air, grazing his chest with a cold, biting precision. He reels back, clutching at the shallow gash. The sensation is impossible. He is a ghost, a wisp of thought. Why can he feel the bite of steel? The tattooed stranger watches from outside, a dry laugh bubbling in his throat as he enjoys the boy's confusion.
You look surprised. You might be in a purely spiritual state right now, but never forget, it is the consciousness that dictates the reality of the body. When the mind is wounded, the flesh responds. It's a fundamental biological reflex that transcends the physical plane. To put it bluntly, if your soul is extinguished here, your body will follow it into the grave.
Back in the tangible world, deep within the shadows of the forest, Lin Yi's physical body begins to convulse with terrifying intensity. His breath grows shallow and ragged, each gasp a desperate struggle for oxygen that no longer seems to satisfy his starved lungs. The color drains from his face, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray as a cold, deathly sweat breaks out across his brow. The stranger flicked his wrist with effortless grace, and more freaks emerged from the void, their forms coalescing from the gray mist like ink in water. There was no doubt now this man was actively rewriting in Chengdao's memories, inserting his own horrors into the fabric of the old man's past. But a question burned in Lin Yi's mind. If he had the power to change the past within a mind, why wait until now? Why choose this specific moment to intervene? Lin Yi tried to mimic the stranger's actions, reaching out with his mind to reshape the memory himself. Since his own ability was a mirror of the other man's, he should have been able to do the same. But no matter how hard he focused, how much he willed the scene to change, the fragmenting world remained stubbornly indifferent to his touch. He didn't understand the mechanics of the stranger's power. Experimenting blindly was dangerous, and it would take time he didn't have. Whether it was the battle raging in the real world or the crumbling stability of Chengdao's mind, time was a luxury he couldn't afford. He was trapped. Every time he tried to move, the phantom freaks surged forward to block him, their movements synchronized and robotic. These weren't memories of monsters, and Chengdao had actually fought. They were constructs, entities birthed by the stranger within the memory itself. Why could he create them, but Lin Yi couldn't? There was something he was missing, something fundamental about the nature of this mental landscape. Lin Yi searched his mind, remembering the surge of hatred he had felt when he first entered in Chengdao's perspective. In that instant, the threads of fate at his chest flared with a brilliant, blinding light, reacting to a power he had yet to fully grasp. Through the fragmenting haze of the memory, a vision emerges from the void, a tree of impossible proportions. It is a colossal, primordial entity that pierces the heavens, its crown lost in the infinite, glowing clouds above. Countless glowing threads hang from its ancient branches, swaying gently in a phantom breeze that carries the scent of ancient stars. One of those threads, a brilliant filament of light, drifts toward him, seeking him out with a divine purpose. The moment the thread touches his chest, his mind is flooded with a crystalline clarity. The fog of confusion vanishes, replaced by an absolute, divine understanding. In that instant, he knows. He understands exactly what the stranger's power is, as if the secret were etched into his very soul. The ability is called Dreaming of the Past, a name that carries the weight of 1,000 stolen memories. The vision of the celestial tree dissolves as quickly as it had appeared, leaving him wondering if it had been a dream within a dream. The vision of the celestial tree fades, but the clarity it bestowed remains. Lin Yi has no time to linger on the cosmic mystery. The fragmenting memory demands his focus. He turns his attention toward Chengdao, who is still locked in the phantom battle. Suddenly, a voice, soft, heartbreaking, and impossibly clear, whispers in the old man's ear.
Chengdao, run. Please, you have to survive.
The words are a fragment of a lost truth, the final wish of a woman who was taken too soon in the real world, and Chengdao never heard them. He had been too far away, arriving only in time to find the tragedy complete. But here, in this reconstructed past, the message finally reaches its mark. Lin Yi has woven this truth into the memory, using the stranger's own power to anchor the butcher back to reality. And Cheng Dao freezes. The relentless fury in his eyes is replaced by a shattering realization. He turns his head, casting a final, lingering look at the phantom of his home. The constructs the stranger created, the monsters and the distorted world, begin to crack and splinter like fragile glass under a heavy hammer.
What did you do?
The stranger's smug expression vanishes, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage as he loses his grip on the memory.
I just put Uncle Anne's memories back on the right track.
He looks up at the floating man, his gaze meeting the stranger's fury with an immovable determination.
I know what your power is. It's called dreaming of the past. You can't just seize control of someone's body. Not directly. Every soul has its own will, its own fortress of consciousness. As long as a person's mind remains clear and unclouded, you are powerless to enter. But every fortress has a crack, a weakness born of human emotion. Regret, guilt, despair. You look for any feeling powerful enough to fracture the ego. Once you identify that crack, you wait for the victim to slip back into their own past. That's when you strike, stoking those dying embers into a localized firestorm. The consciousness spirals into chaos, and in that moment of total vulnerability, you simply step in and take the wheel. But you don't just stop at control. You keep them trapped in that loop, amplifying the pain until the consciousness itself simply dissolves. And once Cheng Dao's mind was gone, his body would be nothing more than an empty shell for you to inhabit. Brain death. That was your endgame.
Deep within the shattered fragments of Cheng Dao's past, a single, festering agony refused to fade, the memory of his wife's final moments. The tattooed stranger had burrowed into that trauma, gorging himself on the butcher's grief. He twisted that sorrow and the man's visceral loathing for the freaks into a mental cage, anchoring his mind to this eternal second of misery. Lin Yi watched the horror unfold, his own spirit dragged into the man's vision. He was a silent witness to the recursive loop, a psychological trap where Cheng Dao's mind was hopelessly ensnared. The intruder stoked the flames of that hatred until it consumed every thought. Spectral monsters, grotesque echoes of the freaks, were conjured from the void, endless targets for Cheng Dao's obsession. And Cheng Dao didn't see the futility or the endless waves. He only saw things that needed to die. He was drowning in a sea of blood fueled by a madness that wouldn't let him rest. To shatter the cycle, Lin Yi knew the narrative had to change. He had to force the memory to move past the moment of impact. From the depths of the psychic void, Lin Yi reached out. He didn't use force, but a memory, a ghost woven from the very silence of the man's mind.
Honey? Chang'er? Please, look at me.
It was a voice that belonged to the past, the only sound that could penetrate the red fog of Cheng Dao's rage. It was a lifeline thrown into the center of his madness. The strategy held. As the phantom monsters crumbled into shadows, the heavy stalled gears of the memory finally began to turn once more. And Cheng Dao refused to flee. The city was a graveyard, and he would be its silent executioner. Melting into the shadows, he transformed into a predator, driven by a single icy resolve to butcher every freak within the city walls. He salvaged what meager traces of his life remained, the few items that hadn't been consumed alongside the bones. Then, with a final, somber gesture, he put his home to the torch, watching the flames erase his past. He became a phantom haunting the urban sprawl, a relentless ghost who struck from the dark. He waged a one-man war against the monsters until his lethality became impossible to ignore. Soon, the hunters found themselves being hunted in return. A violent confrontation left him battered and bleeding. Realizing he could no longer stay, he vanished into the dense, unforgiving wilderness of Sifang Mountain. It was there, amidst the trees and silence, that he crossed paths with Lin Yi and his companions. Their presence disrupted his singular focus. He still craved the blood of every freak on Earth, but these children were defenseless, prey waiting for a predator. If he turned his back, they would be torn apart just like the ones he'd lost. The memory of that previous slaughter burned in his mind, and he swore he wouldn't let history repeat itself. He made a choice. He would lead them. He would guide these lambs out of the city's predatory maw, even if it meant delaying his own vengeance. It wasn't merely an act of mercy. It was a silent tribute, a way to honor the ghosts of his family by ensuring these lives wouldn't be wasted. The flow of time snapped back into alignment, and Cheng Dao's consciousness surged like a breaking wave, reclaiming his mind with a violent, focused intensity. A colossal force erupted within the butcher's psychic space. It hammered against Lin Yi's spirit, a tidal wave of mental pressure designed to eject any and all intruders from the man's body. Lin Yi wasn't the only one being purged. The tattooed stranger was also being torn from his host, forced out by the sheer weight of Cheng Dao's returning will. In the shimmering void of pure consciousness, the two intruders faced each other. The stranger's spirit was twisted in a snarl of murderous frustration.
You actually think you've won? Don't be so arrogant. There are plenty of other vessels here for me to seize. You want to play the savior? The big hero? Just watch. I'm going to ensure you can't save a single one of them.
The threat hit Lin Yi with the force of a physical blow. He understood the bastard's plan. He would possess their bodies and force them to take their own lives. He would turn their own hands into weapons of suicide. Lin Yi lunged forward to intercept him, but his attention was caught by the scene on the ground. Zhang Cheng and the others were already being enveloped in thick, silken cocoons. Even Lin Yi's own physical body, lying unconscious on the cold workshop floor, was being bound by the shimmering threads.
That negotiation you had with the freak, was it really just to tie us up like this? Is this actually going to work?
Of course it'll work. If that bastard can hijack Uncle Anne's mind, he can do the same to us. The moment he's kicked out of the butcher's head, he'll be looking for a new home. But if we're immobilized, he can't use our bodies to fight each other.
Zhang Cheng's gaze flickered toward the girl known as Flower, a trace of his usual meta-humor returning.
I really don't want to be forced into a brawl with a girl as pretty as her. It'd be bad for my image. You've got that thick armor, so you'd probably be fine. But me? I'm much too delicate for that kind of roughhousing.
But what if he takes over Flower instead?
He won't. His loathing for freaks is too deep. That kind of prejudice doesn't just vanish. He'd sooner die than inhabit one of them. To control a monster is to become one. And that bastard is the last person who'd ever accept that.
He let out a cold, mocking laugh, the sound echoing hollowly in the workshop.
If he actually tries it, I'll spend my afterlife laughing in his face.
Lin Yi, watching from the psychic void, felt a grudging admiration for the boy. Zhang Cheng had managed to anticipate the escalation and found a way to neutralize the threat before it could spiral out of control.
Well?
Lin Yi's spirit began, a thin, knowing smile touching his face as he locked eyes with the intruder.
Are you still determined to see this through?
The tattooed stranger offered no verbal reply, but the defiance in his gaze was unmistakable. His eyes burned with a cold, flickering fire that refused to be extinguished. And Cheng Dao had fully repossessed his own mind. The threshold had been crossed. The stranger's dominance over the butcher was shattered, leaving him adrift and desperate for a new host. He understood the situation with chilling clarity. If he maintained his current course, if he played his cards right, those silken restraints on the survivors would eventually be severed. He just needed to wait for the right moment to strike. With a sudden, desperate lunge, the stranger's spirit dove toward Lu Linhai, disappearing into the boy's form like a shadow sinking into a pool. Lin Yi's brows furrowed in alarm, his own spirit surging in pursuit. He wouldn't let the intruder take another hostage. But before Lin Yi could even reach the threshold of the boy's mind, the stranger's consciousness was violently expelled. He shot backward, reeling from a rejection he hadn't anticipated. Lin Yi skidded to a halt in the void, utterly bewildered. He watched as the intruder struggled to regain his balance, his features contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. Before Lin Yi could even wrap his head around what he'd just seen, the intruder pivoted. His focus shifted to Zhang Cheng, his spirit already in motion. He plunged into the genius's form. On the ground, Zhang Cheng's physical body convulsed, a sharp, violent tremor rippling through his bound limbs.
Zhang Cheng? What's happening?
I feel contaminated, like some kind of parasite just wriggled into my brain.
His gaze darted toward Cheng Dao. The butcher was fully awake, his eyes clear and his posture steady. The skirmish with Flower had come to an abrupt halt.
Hold on! That bastard just tried to hijack me, didn't he? Ugh, gross. The sensation is absolutely revolting. It's like having a cockroach in your ear.
His assessment was accurate. But just as with Lu Linhai, the stranger's spirit was ejected almost instantly, spat out by the sheer complexity of Zhang Cheng's mental architecture.
What in the name of all that is holy is wrong with these two? One of them is a goddamn void, and the other, he's a labyrinth, a literal mental maze.
A labyrinth. Lin Yi nodded internally. That was a perfect description for Zhang Cheng's convoluted high-speed mind. But the void? What did that imply about Lu Linhai? Was the intruder suggesting that the boy's head was simply empty? That he was too much of a simpleton to be possessed? A dry, involuntary snort of amusement escaped Lin Yi's spirit. The sheer absurdity of the situation, the intruder being rejected by both a void and a labyrinth, was too much to handle. But the laughter died in his throat as the stranger's head snapped toward him with terrifying speed. The intruder's gaze wasn't on the spirit, however. His burning eyes were fixed on Lin Yi's physical shell, still lying vulnerable and defenseless on the workshop floor. The hunt was far from over. The intruder's mental projection moved with a velocity that defied physical logic. Before Lin Yi could even blink, the stranger's soul lunged, diving straight into the core of his being. Lin Yi didn't hesitate. He threw himself into the wake of the intrusion, racing to prevent the stranger from hijacking his physical form. The threat was existential. If the stranger succeeded in claiming his body, every one of Lin Yi's unique abilities would fall into enemy hands. His power was a fragile thing, currently tethered to the stranger by the glowing threads of fate. It was the only reason he could even use the man's strength. But if that connection was uncovered, the stranger would surely sever the threads, cutting Lin Yi off from his power source. Without that borrowed power, Lin Yi had no idea if his own soul would survive the collapse. He was fighting for his very existence. Lin Yi plunged deeper into the core of his own psyche, following the intruder's trail. But then, he came to a sudden, jarring halt. The scene before him was unlike anything he could have imagined. For the first time, he stood within the boundaries of his own consciousness. It was a gargantuan, silent expanse where thousands of translucent bubbles floated without direction. These spheres seemed to contain the echoes of his history, every memory he had ever lived. The sheer number of them was staggering, a sea of past moments that threatened to swallow his focus. Beyond the drifting bubbles, a colossal structure dominated the horizon. A titanic tree, its roots burrowed deep into the fabric of the void, stood in defiant majesty. Lin Yi recognized it instantly. This was the same tree he had seen before, but its presence here inside his own mind was a mystery that defied explanation. Countless silk threads draped from its massive branches, forming a complex, shimmering tapestry of fate. This time, the image was searingly clear. The intruder was equally stunned. He stood frozen, staring up at the impossible tree with a mixture of horror and pure disbelief.
What? What the hell is this thing?
His features were twisted in a mask of shock. In all his experience, he had clearly never seen a consciousness as warped as this.
Who are you people? What kind of twisted thoughts are you packing in your heads?
He seemed to be comparing Lin Yi to others he'd encountered, Zhang Cheng, Lu Lin Hai, even and Cheng Dao. Compared to this, and Cheng Dao's mind had been the only one that felt normal. Hearing the man's outburst, Lin Yi couldn't help but wonder. If his own mind was this bizarre, what would the internal worlds of Chu Kai or Chu Yun look like? The stranger ground his teeth in frustration. He had intended to seize Lin Yi's body, but this landscape was so alien he didn't even know where to begin. In a desperate attempt to find a foothold, he reached out to grasp one of the passing bubbles, hoping to strip away Lin Yi's secrets. But his touch met only a cold, unresponsive void. The memory bubbles remained sealed, their contents invisible to him. Lin Yi tried the same, reaching for a bubble as it drifted past his spectral hand. Faint, blurry shapes flickered briefly, images that made no sense even to him. They were locked away, guarded by a power he didn't understand. The stranger's patience finally snapped. He let out a feral growl of pure, unadulterated irritation. Lin Yi spoke up, his voice steady despite the chaos of his surroundings.
Give it up. I don't know why my mind is like this, but it's clear you're not welcome here.
He felt a surge of relief. Whatever this place was, it was protecting him from the hijacking.
Now, get out of my head. We have things to talk about.
Lin Yi wanted answers about the world, not a mental brawl. But as the thought formed, the celestial tree reacted. One of the thousands of threads began to move, snaking through the air like a living thing. It reached out for the stranger. The strand latched onto the man's soul. Instantly, he collapsed, his face contorted in a scream of absolute agony. He clawed at the thread, trying to rip it away, but his hands passed through it as if it were made of light. He was powerless to stop the connection. In that moment of forced contact, the floodgates opened. The stranger's entire history began to pour into Lin Yi's mind. Through the hazy distortion of the psychic link, a new image materialized. Lin Yi saw a young boy, small and unassuming. It was the stranger, but from a time long before he became the hardened scavenger he was today. Back then, he had been a gentle child, his eyes still bright with an innocence that had long since withered. The parallels were chilling. Just like Lin Yi, this boy had been raised by his own flesh and blood, only for those parents to personally hand him over to the monsters. In that city, the residents were well aware of the creatures in their midst. These weren't the mantis wolves Lin Yi knew, but a different, more specialized breed of freak. They were a species that preyed exclusively on the young. Lin Yi felt a grim sense of recognition. Every farm had its own unique way of managing its livestock, and this city's methods were particularly perverse. Decades of systematic brainwashing had twisted the local culture until the people didn't just fear the freaks, they revered them as gods. They were convinced that their city's very survival depended on the monster's continued presence. Periodically, the community would choose a group of children from their own ranks. These lucky few were bestowed with the title of Godchild. Amidst the jealous stares of their peers, they were led away to the lair of the beasts. To the brainwashed populace, there was nothing horrifying about it. It was a holy sacrifice, a divine blessing that ensured the prosperity of the many. Following the ritualistic bathing and purification, the chosen children were confined within a sterile room. There, they waited for the arrival of the divine beings they had been taught to worship. The stranger was among them, a small figure huddled in the corner of the honored group. At the time, he was blissfully unaware of the horror that awaited him. He only felt a sense of pride, knowing that his selection had brought such joy to his parents. He had no concept that the god he was about to meet was nothing more than a ravenous, bloodthirsty predator. The freaks of the city loved children in their own specialized way, a love that was measured purely by the sweetness of their flesh. The monsters of that city held a profound love for children, though it was a love rooted entirely in the hunger of their bellies. They entered the room not as gods, but as ravenous predators, and the feast began. The creatures tore into the children with a savage, methodical hunger, savoring each mouthful as screams of unimaginable agony filled the sterile chamber. Through the psychic link, Lin Yi watched the young stranger. The boy was kneeling, his entire frame racked with uncontrollable tremors as the nightmare unfolded mere feet away. He desperately tried to cling to his indoctrination, telling himself that this was a holy blessing, a supreme honor beyond his understanding. He wanted to believe that what he saw wasn't real. The other children were doing the same, their lifelong brainwashing warring with the primal instinct of survival. But the human body is designed to feel pain, and no amount of faith could dull the agony of being eaten piece by piece. The air grew thick with the metallic, pungent stench of blood. The louder the children wailed for their parents, the more excited the monsters became, their feeding growing more frenzied. The boy wanted to run, but the terror had anchored him to the blood-slicked floor. In his final moments of despair, he felt his consciousness begin to drift, detaching from his physical form as a freak slithered toward him. Just as the monster's claw was about to descend, the reinforced door was kicked inward with a thunderous crash. A volley of blades hissed through the air, burying themselves deep into the freak's bloated hides. A lanky, nonchalant man strolled into the carnage, a dozen circus daggers spinning in a lethal orbit around him. He took in the scene with a casual, unimpressed gaze. He clicked his tongue in mock sympathy, his voice cutting through the screams with chilling ease.
Well, this is just plain cruel.
As the man stepped further into the light, Lin Yi's attention was seized by a single detail, a silver earring dangling from his earlobe, shaped into the letter R. A tall, slender figure emerged from the crimson haze. Around him, a swarm of butcher knives danced in the air, their blades catching the flickering torchlight with a lethal gleam. The man moved with a clinical precision that felt eerily familiar. With a flick of his wrist, the knives streaked forward, carving through the freaks before they could devour the huddling children. The creature they called a divine being slumped to the obsidian floor, its grotesque form leaking dark fluids as the swarm of blades finished their work. As the monster fell, the young boy's consciousness snapped back into his own trembling frame. The dissociation shattered, leaving him cold and breathless on the stone floor. He was safe. Relief flooded through him, a desperate hope blooming in his chest. He needed to find his parents to tell them the truth about the monsters they worshipped. The boy stumbled through the doorway, his heart pounding with a desperate need for the warmth of home. But as he looked up at his parents, the embrace he craved was nowhere to be found. Instead, he was met with eyes full of cold, sharp disgust.
Why are you back? Why didn't you die like you were supposed to? You were meant for the Lord Divine Being. Why are you still here?
His mother's face contorted into a mask of pure rage. She glared at him with such intensity that he feared she might lung forward and crush the life from his throat. This wasn't the gentle woman he remembered. She was a stranger, a monster in his mother's skin.
This is your fault, every bit of it. You brought this ruin upon us.
His father's fists were white-knuckled as he stepped closer, his shadow looming large over the trembling boy. With a sudden, violent jerk, he seized the boy by his collar and hoisted him into the air.
The Lord Divine Beings have turned their backs on us because of your cowardice. Because you refuse to be consumed, our city is being torn apart.
In the distance, the muffled sounds of the city's destruction bled through the thin walls. Thick, oily smoke billowed against the smoggy sky, accompanied by the faint, agonizing wails of those caught in the chaos. The boy went limp in his father's grip, a cold, hollow realization settling in his gut. They had always known what those divine beings really were, and they had still handed him over without a second thought. He searched his mind for some mistake he had made, some hidden sin that could justify this betrayal, but there was nothing. He just wanted to live. He just wanted to be with them. Was that truly such a terrible thing?
Just die! Go and die!
The father's fist swung with lethal intent, aimed directly at the boy's face. The child squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for a blow that would surely shatter his world. But the impact never came.
Don't be afraid. You've done nothing wrong. This isn't your fault.
A figure had appeared as if woven from the shadows themselves. With effortless strength, he caught the father's descending fist, his voice a soothing balm against the boy's trembling terror. Lin Yi watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of unease. He strained to see the stranger's face, but it was perpetually obscured, shrouded in a mist that seemed to exist only within the memory itself.
The reason the world has become like this, it's all because of those disgusting freaks.
You dare blaspheme the Lord Divine Beings!
The father thrashed, trying to wrench his hand free, but the man's grip was immovable. It was as if he were fighting against stone or something even more absolute.
Child, you must understand, your parents love you. If it weren't for these freaks, they would never have been driven to this. Do not blame them. Blame those who allow such monsters to walk among us.
Bullshit! You dare show disrespect to the Lord!
The father was gone. In his place, a cloud of crimson spray hung in the air, slowly dissipating into the smog. The man in the mist gathered the boy into a protective embrace.
Don't be afraid. From this day forward, I am your father. I will protect you. In return, stand with me. We will overthrow those who allow these freaks to exist. We will slaughter them all and reclaim our world.
The boy looked up, his gaze suddenly becoming firm and cold. The fear had vanished, replaced by a chilling resolve that made Lin Yi's blood run cold. It wasn't natural. It was the look of someone whose mind had been rewritten.
Demon, you're a demon!
Pitiful, ignorant people. You were all innocent. If it weren't for the freaks, you would have had happy lives. Rest easy. You are free now. This city, it will find the same freedom as you.
The mist man stood in the center of the crimson haze, his hand resting gently on the boy's head. For a moment, the swirling fog at the top of his form shifted, as if he were turning to look directly at a presence that shouldn't exist.
If you wish, you could also become my child. I'll be waiting for you.
Lin Yi's breath hitched as the words echoed through the psychic space. He looked around frantically, but the room was empty of anyone but the boy and the man in the mist. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Those words were meant for him. How could a memory from the distant past sense his presence? The very thought made his skin crawl. This mist wasn't just a recollection, it was something that could see across time itself, reaching out from the stranger's mind to find him. The memory shattered like glass, the gray mist and childhood home dissolving into a blur of light. When Lin Yi opened his eyes again, the cold reality of the godchild chamber rushed back to meet him. He found himself still bound, his limbs heavy and numb. Beside him, Zhang Cheng and Lu Linhai were also tied up, their faces etched with a mix of relief and suspicion.
He's awake! Lin Yi is finally awake!
Quiet. We don't even know if that's actually Lin Yi in there or some other nightmare using his skin.
Lin Yi ignored them, his mind still reeling from the visions. The stranger's consciousness had departed, leaving a void where the memories had been. For a fleeting second, he almost regretted the man's exit. There was still so much he didn't understand. He looked across at the stranger's physical body. The man lay slumped and unmoving, the floral sedative still keeping him trapped in a deep, dreamless slumber. His chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. A daring thought crossed Lin Yi's mind. Could he use the man's own technique against him? Could he project his own mind into that sleeping frame? It was a gamble, an invasion of a god-chosen's territory, but the potential for intel was too great to ignore. The threads snaked through the air with a life of their own, drifting toward everyone in the vicinity, humans and freaks alike. The plan for possession was forgotten. A new, more immediate danger had just begun. The luminous strands radiating from the motionless figure were a herald of doom, a lethal threat creeping toward Lin Yi and his companions. He couldn't fathom it. How could someone stripped of consciousness and sprawled on the earth pose such a mortal risk? After a tense silence, Lin Yi resolved to sever one of the threads. He needed to understand the nature of the approaching catastrophe.
Uncle Ann,
Quick, cut these bindings.
Still ensnared in the freak's viscous silk, Lin Yi turned his desperate gaze toward In Chengdao, who stood ready nearby.
Don't touch those threads. Not until we're sure. We have no idea who's really behind those eyes. Until your identity is proven, you're staying right where you are.
Lu Linhai's eyes narrowed with distrust. The fact that Lin Yi's first instinct upon waking was to escape the restraints only deepened his paranoia.
It's me, Lin Yi. That stranger's mind has already retreated to its original shell. Look at him. 7 threads of destiny are bleeding out, and every single one is anchored to us. I need to snap one of them. It's the only way to glimpse the threat before it hits us. If I don't, we're all dead.
Cut the ghost stories, Lin Yi.
He paused, his gaze sharpening as he formulated a test.
Answer one question. If you get it right, maybe I'll believe you. Tell me, when I say the name Chu Kai, what's the first word that pops into your head?
It was a simple trap. Chu Kai was still out cold back in the cavern, far from this clearing. If a foreign consciousness had hijacked Lin Yi's body, they would have no knowledge of the unconscious boy or his quirks.
Sister complex, obviously.
Spot on, it really is him.
Hold on!
Zhang Cheng was far less easily swayed than Lu Linhai. He stepped forward, his eyes analytical as they swept over Lin Yi.
A soul invading a body might have access to its host's memories. A correct answer proves nothing, it just means the intruder is observant.
Time was running out. Lin Yi's eyes darted from Zhang Cheng's cold stare to the towering, insectoid monstrosity standing off to the side. A reckless idea sparked in his mind. He forced himself upright, his legs unsteady as he bolted toward the creature. He closed the distance, deftly dodging the jagged spikes that lined its obsidian carapace. He leaned in, almost touching the beast, then spun around to face Zhang Cheng.
That intruder. He'd never get this close to one of these things. He despises them too much. Does that settle it? Is it proof enough for you?
That idiotic glint in your eyes is unmistakable. Fine, I believe you, Uncle Ann. Release him.
And Chengdao had been occupied, his fingers dancing over the mechanisms of his metal gauntlets. At Zhang Cheng's signal, his butcher knife hummed through the air, severing the silk bonds in a single, fluid motion. Free at last, Lin Yi didn't waste a second. He reached out, his fingers closing around one of the spectral threads, and pulled with all his might. It was impossible. No matter how much spiritual force he applied, the strand emerging from the stranger remained stubbornly intact.
What's the holdup?
It won't snap. I can't break the connection.
A cold dread washed over him. If the threads were unbreakable, was their doom already sealed? Was there truly no escape?
Has your power finally hit its limit?
If it had failed, I'd be blind to them. Something else is wrong.
He leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized the fibers. He saw it then, the subtle, terrifying difference. The light within them was faint, almost spectral. They were translucent, shimmering like heat haze, only slowly solidifying into reality. Usually breaking a thread triggered a chain of lucky accidents that averted disaster, but these translucent strands were different. Their state suggested that while the danger was avoidable, it wouldn't happen through mere chance. Luck wasn't on the menu today. To survive, they had to either end the stranger's life immediately or flee this clearing before the threads fully manifested. But Lin Yi hesitated. He was certain this man held the keys to the mysteries surrounding the city of Oracle. He needed another way, a more direct, more dangerous method. If he could see what the man intended, if he could glimpse the next move before it was made, they might still stand a chance. He could go deeper. He could invade the man's mind, scour his memories, and maybe, if fate allowed, seize control of the body itself. Without another word, Lin Yi let his consciousness drift. Using the very power he'd stolen from his opponent, he surged forward and plunged into the stranger's mental space. The transition was instantaneous. Lin Yi plunged into the stranger's consciousness, only to find himself submerged in an absolute suffocating darkness. There was nothing. But as his eyes adjusted to the void, he realized the emptiness wasn't absolute. A pale, flickering light pulsed in the distance. Within that fragile glow, a young boy sat huddled on the floor, his small frame curled into a tight, trembling ball. A rhythmic muttering drifted from his lips. Lin Yi bridged the gap, his footsteps silent in the void. As he drew near, the boy's features became clear. It was the stranger, but as a child, a ghost of the man's former self? Why was the mental landscape so barren? It defied everything Lin Yi knew about the human mind. The man's previous behavior had suggested a complex, functional mind. This void was a contradiction. If the space was empty, it meant the memories were gone, and with them, any hope of finding the truth. The silence was broken by the boy's voice, a dry, rasping whisper that chilled Lin Yi to the bone.
Die. Everyone, die.
Lin Yi's brow furrowed. This child was more than a vision. He was a living fragment of a suppressed past. Driven by a desperate need for answers, he reached out, his hand trembling as he moved to touch the boy's shoulder. The instant his skin made contact, a tidal wave of psychic pressure slammed into him, threatening to crush his very soul. Lin Yi recoiled, his heart hammering against his ribs. In that fleeting, violent connection, a single image had been seared into his mind. Standing in the center of the child's world was a man, a figure whose features were obscured by a swirling, unnatural mist. The truth hit Lin Yi with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a natural mental state. The emptiness was a construct, a fortress built by the shrouded figure. It was the ultimate failsafe. Hypnosis, deep-seated indoctrination, and mental erasure. The moment the stranger faced a threat he couldn't overcome, his own mind would purge itself. Like a pre-compiled routine, the program executed without hesitation, wiping away every trace of identity and history. It was a perfect defense. No interrogator, no telepath could ever extract information from a mind that no longer existed. The void was a clean slate, leaving only one primal directive, a final suicidal mission to take his captors into the grave with him.
Die. We all die.
Lin Yi's consciousness slammed back into his physical form, his lungs burning as he let out a jagged, desperate cry.
Run! Get out of here! Now! He's a bomb. He's going to kill us all.
The fate threads radiating from the stranger were no longer translucent. They were sharpening into solid, crystalline lines of light. Their time had evaporated. There was no time for explanations. No time to recount the horrors he'd witnessed in the void. There was only the raw, animalistic need for flight. But human legs were no match for the speed of the impending detonation. The threads were already beginning to pulse with a lethal intensity. Flower's eyes swept over the group, making a silent, split-second decision. Thick, writhing vines erupted from her skin, snaking out to entwine Lin Yi and the others in a secure, protective grip. The nearby freak moved with terrifying insectoid efficiency. It drenched the mangled remains on the ground in a layer of sticky silk, then scooped Flower up in its massive claws and launched itself into the night sky. As they ascended, the clearing shrinking below them, the spectral threads anchored to their chests began to fade, their lethal clarity dissolving back into transparency. Lin Yi's breath hitched in a moment of pure, agonizing relief. But as he looked down, the stranger's body became the epicenter of a massive, reality-warping suction force that began to devour everything in the clearing.